Swedes are very racist. Sweden is extremely, extremely racist. Extremely racist. One of the most racist places I've ever been to.
Describe Sweden as a country after a week here.
That's very nice.
Hi everyone. I'm sure you're familiar with Tim Pool. He rose to fame a few years back when he went to Sweden to find out whether or not Trump was right.
Sweden! Who would believe this? Sweden!
Since then, he's garnered 1 million views on his 2 respective channels, where he covers news and politics from a variety of angles. He is a centrist, after all, and he recently spoke about the Swedish people, their national character. So, what kind of middle ground, carefully thought out thing did Tim Pool have to say about the Swedes? Well, let's take a look.
Even if you're white, they don't want to hire you unless you're a national Swede, like a white Swedish-speaking individual. They discriminate against you full force. Look, I had white people telling me, if you're not a native Swede, they won't hire you. What's going to happen with these refugees and these migrants or these kids who were born in Sweden and are discriminated against based on their race?
You know, I have to ask Tim, how come you didn't say any of this 3 years ago when you were video blogging about Sweden? Your conclusion then was that it's a very creepy, censored country where people aren't allowed to openly discuss their problems with immigration and feminism. Your conclusion now is that it's so racist that not even white Americans can find a job, so obviously non-whites are being oppressed in Sweden. What happened there, Tim? Because it almost kind of looks like you're just stating whatever opinion you think is gonna get you money for the time being.
What's going to happen with these refugees and these migrants or these kids who were born in Sweden and are discriminated against based on their race?
Oh, I don't know. Why don't we ask our Swedish left party that? Because they sure talk about it a lot. Swedes need to be less racist for Sweden to become better. That narrative has been nagged into our ears for the past 10 years or so to motivate this extreme migration policy that we've had. But you visited here for a whole week, so I guess you know an awful lot more than I do, Mr. Big Dick American. He also uploaded a video recently on Sweden's grenade attacks, which just follows along with this same narration, while somehow still exaggerating on the real issues.
So what is happening if not some kind of war? War.
Well, I'll tell you, Tim, as a war refugee, I kind of have a problem with your definition of war, especially considering your hometown of Chicago, which you keep relativizing in this video, has seen more American lives taken than the war-torn country of Afghanistan, which migrants are escaping to come to Sweden, of course. A bunch of immigrant gangs competing over drug territory is not a nationwide war, okay? It's just political incompetence that's embarrassing and lethal. Which is, you know, bad enough on its own, because all you have to do to end all these grenade attacks and shootings is just to legalize. Legalize the plant that saves so many lives. Just legalize it, but you won't. And that's why bad people just keep getting stronger.
Chicago's got gun violence. That's gang violence. This is gang violence too, but I gotta admit, I don't know what's worse. You know, I'm not talking about the level because Chicago's got a ton of gun violence. I'm saying, like, if you had to choose between one guy with a gun and one guy with a grenade, which would you pick?
Yeah, I pick Sweden, where you can be safe in most of the country, while Chicago is just bad.
I'm saying, like, if you had to choose between one guy with a gun and one guy with a grenade, which would you pick? I admit, I think they're both bad. The gun could be targeted, but the grenade's gonna have a lot of collateral damage. I kind of feel like explosives are worse.
Tim paints up this false conflict between being in a shooting and having a grenade thrown at you, when there's really nothing saying that a drive-by is particularly safe. Just over the course of one weekend, you had 59 people shot in Chicago, 7 of which died. Clearly, you have similar crime problems in Chicago as well. You just don't blame it on white racism. So talk about different standards here. Why are you making me do this, Tim? I don't want to speak positively about my country, which has so much to improve. I'm an angry foreigner. But you're forcing me into a position where I'm the Swede-loving foreigner, and I don't know if I can forgive you for that. Of course I can. Just bring it in here, bro.
Progressive policy, social democracy, government programs, these things can work.
No, it can't, Tim, because that is exactly who's been in charge here for the past decades, and that's why we're even talking about these problems. because the left created them, and the right just acted like the left to keep the left happy.
Denmark and Norway don't have these problems. So you want to talk about left-wing policy and progressive policy, minimum wages and college and healthcare and public options or Medicare for all, whatever, has nothing to do with open borders.
Yes, it does, because it follows the greater ideology of equality, economical, social, and migrational. Precisely what we keep hearing is that human migration is as much of a human right as welfare, or sloppy prison sentences, or not being deported when you're a rapist. So stop trying to polish a turd. Your leftists aren't much better than ours. Your leftists think that equality means equity. And that's when you get all these problems. If equality just meant people being treated equally, well, that's what we already have in a capitalist Western society now, isn't it?
It's not the worst levels of crime in the world, but it's substantial enough that they're going to start tightening their border controls. Because it used to be you could just go. You'd hop on a train, you go from Copenhagen to Malmö. Now they're like IDs, passports. Because it's gotten bad.
You're talking about these issues as if it's something that just recently popped up with the refugee crisis, but most of those gangs you're mentioning are second-generation immigrants, meaning we've had problems with integration for decades. But it's only first reached its most unignorable peak now, and that's when you want to swoop in with your expert opinion, Mr. I spent a whole week in Sweden. I've been trying to cover these topics for years in a fact-based, nuance and broad perspective, because there's a lot of things that non-Swedish pundits miss when covering Sweden. It's often not as simple as people make it out abroad, whether on the left or the right. But you, Mr. Big Dick American, just gotta plow through the door and gangbang the whole thing with your half-baked conclusion. And that's kind of a problem when not even Swedish citizens are informed enough.
I know that Sweden is a very, very safe place, especially compared to the United States.
Swedes are very racist. Sweden is extremely, extremely racist.
You're repeating the exact same narrative that our leftist media does, and it's doing a pretty good job of keeping the Swedes from standing up for their country. What you're saying is primarily true about the elites, not so much the general public consisting of people making out Sweden. So maybe you're just a lazy journalist. See, this is what I was alluding to in my first video on the skeptics and their Patreon hypocrisy, where I revealed that Tim Pool still uses Patreon after promising to boycott Patreon. That kind of inability to hold a principle pretty much lays the foundation for the modern journalist. So you'd be fooled to assume that type of personality is only interested in working for the Wall Street Journal. And just to clarify, Swedish for Immigrants classes are free and widely encouraged. So there's plenty of incentive and opportunity for anyone to learn the language and study. It's just that people often choose not to.
Creepy place. Don't go there. They put all of these refugees and migrants into their own neighborhoods, basically isolating them. You have teenagers and people in their early 20s who were born in Sweden from Somali parents, and they are called migrants colloquially by people in Sweden, even though they were born there.
You know, second-generation immigrant is a term for a reason, Tim. Because when you have these groups of young men who look foreign, talk foreign, and act foreign, maybe it makes sense to not think of them as Swedish. I mean, if nothing else, for the sake of their own gender identity, because as an immigrant myself, I've interacted with these people, and I've noticed there's actually a desire to not be labeled Swedish. They go out of their way to not be Swedish. It is often perceived as undesirable. Sometimes due to social exclusion, sure, but sometimes due to cultural reasons. So it's really not as simple as evil white Swedes. Now here's something I would like Tim to consider. How can you report on immigrant crime if there's no immigrants? Everyone is Swedish, right? So we don't need no statistics based on ethnicity to find out if this policy is a good idea or a bad idea. Sound familiar? That logic has been the very outline for the Swedish blind spot. Okay, that logic has made the foundation for all our media censorship, silencing the debates on immigration policy. Yet Tim Pool will just queef out this Antifa logic in a random tirade against Swedes. Now, as a nuance-loving foreigner, I do have to point out that Tim Pool accidentally stumbled across something very real here. Namely, the elitism.
Swedes think they're better than everyone else, but they pretend they're not because that's part of the elitism.
Sweden does have a very large middle class. It's around 50%, if I'm not mistaken. And with a middle class, you get a middle class complex of almost being upper class. So you'll see a bit of that, but it's mostly rooted in insecurity and low self-esteem, otherwise known as the law of Jante. It's not rooted in malice and racial superiority, because Swedish people act as cold and weird towards each other as well. More than anything, Swedish people are notoriously introverted in their culture. There's a really good TV show called Welcome to Sweden, I think it's on Netflix, where an American guy meets Swedish girl, and they capture the culture differences pretty well. There's a scene where the lead actress looks out her peephole before exiting out into the hallway because she doesn't want to say hi to her neighbors. Very Swedish. Now, instead of listening to some random American tourist, check out this clip from my channel where two refugees, one of which has lived here his whole life, try to dissect the complexity of Swedish culture. Swedish people act awkward with anyone who's outside of their perceived collective, whether it's clothes that stand out, hair that stands out, or speaking that stands out. Trust me on that last one. It's called cultural socialism, okay? Not racism.
I hope ASAP Rocky gets out. He seems like a good dude.
Yeah, considering ASAP's crew ended up being convicted of assault, maybe not. Considering a broken glass bottle might have been used to cut someone up or not, maybe not. That's why I ended up deleting my video on ASAP Rocky, while you kept yours up, I see. Very good journalism there. I'm not even a journalist. I'm just a regular run-of-the-mill alcoholic who can smell your bullshit stronger than the one that's present in my underwear. So share this video for the lulz. I'm gonna have a shower, check the video description, and bye!
But you know what? I'm an American, so I'm biased.
You shit your britches?
I just shit myself.